Welcome, everyone. We're very happy to have with us Ravi Rajan. He is the president of the California Institute of the Arts. He studied music education as an undergraduate at the University of Oklahoma, and he earned a master's degree in music at Yale University. He was previously the dean of the School of the Arts at Purchase College in New York, and among his many accomplishments there, he established a new Master of Arts degree in Entrepreneurship in the Arts, the first graduate degree of its kind. He's a trumpet player, and as a trumpet player, he performed in various musical ensembles, large orchestral, big band, chamber settings, as well as for theater on and off Broadway. And he's also a member of the Tony Awards nominating committee. And in 2010, he was elected a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. And he is now the fourth president of the California Institute of the Arts, or CalArts. Ravi, it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Joshua. Only one thing, I'm not on the Tony nominating committee. I had a good time doing that when I was in New York. And so,
I see. Okay.
It was a former thing, but, and of course, I haven't actually checked with the wing. I did something with them. I did a scholarship thing with them just this week, but I'm wondering how all of that's going. It just recently announced that Broadway theaters are going to be closed through mid-2021 now. So, it's a tough time for people in the creative disciplines in every one of the art forms right now. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. This is terrific.
Actually, some of the challenges that are facing the arts now in this time of a pandemic, we're going to get to that in a minute. But before we do that, I would like to just talk about you and your background. How does one become the president of CalArts? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, sometimes I tell people that if you stay somewhere long enough, they make you the boss. So I came to CalArts from SUNY Purchase, which some folks on the East Coast know more intimately. It's a school that's part of the State University of New York system, just in Westchester County, just north of New York City. And it's when it was founded by then Governor Nelson Rockefeller in terms of the expansion of the SUNY system. And he really wanted what he used to call a Juilliard of the arts, for a Juilliard of the public, I should say. So understanding that arts institutions were primarily private, like CalArts and like Juilliard, that something that was of the people of New York to have that happen. So, I started there, and I actually interestingly started in the School of Art and Design. I have a lot of colleagues there still, and made my way through that through the School of Art and Design, eventually leading the School of Art and Design there, and then becoming the Dean of the Arts across all the arts forms, which was similar to the outpost here at CalArts in terms of there was strong programs in art and music, theater, dance, and then of course arts entrepreneurship, arts management and entrepreneurship, which was a new thing that we sort of developed while I was there. So I spent a long time at SUNY Purchase, 16 years. So, and then I really, before that was working in New York City, playing Broadway shows, doing different things, freelance musician, as well as doing media design, which I actually started doing both threads when I was in high school, and then I'll put my way through college at the University of Oklahoma doing that media design, as well as, of course, studying the trumpet.
It sounds like then the arts kind of found you very early. I'm assuming music drew you first, but maybe I'm wrong. Was it something else, or was it music? What was it?
Oh yeah, absolutely, it was music. Well, it's interesting. A couple of things. So I'm a product of the wonderful public support of the people of the United States. So I was born in this country. My parents are immigrants to the United States. I was born in Seattle, but moved to Norman, Oklahoma when I was a year old. And when I was growing up in Norman, there were amazing parts of what was available to all young people. So the public library was quite good, still quite good. And in this public library, it was nicely air conditioned, which is always a bonus in Oklahoma in the summer, but they had computers. And of course, this is the late 70s, early 80s, where computers didn't do anything unless you programmed them to do it. But luckily in a library, there are books on programming. So I was able to teach myself programming just by using it. I read all the books in the children's section. I remember they had a wonderful listening library. So I was able to listen to things. And so you know, computers and computer programming were a big part of that. My mom actually worked at the city just around the corner, so it worked out really well that it was in the same complex. And like you said, actually, my uncle got me a Canon A1 35 millimeter camera when I was in 4th grade, I believe. So I was very into photography. I was very into sort of, you know, the composing images, you know, in the frame, and enjoyed that very much. And I loved music. So the other piece of the public enterprise that was really important to me was things on the radio and PBS and things on television. This is how, you know, a young family, immigrant family, and a young kid who's U.S. citizen but born there can negotiate the differences between the home culture and the outside culture, right? As you can imagine, growing up in Oklahoma was a little different than what happened in the house. Is different than what happened at school and around and outside the house. So that was that kind of window into the world, right? The arts were all of these kind of media and arts were a window into how the world worked. So there was this, I played viola when I was in 5th grade, is when they let you start having instruments, and I really wanted to play an instrument, loved, you know, listening to music. And never did take piano when I was a little kid, which happens to a lot, and I'm doing for my, my 2 sons as well. And it was interesting. I think my teacher had a nervous breakdown, and so these things happen. And in 5th grade, I was watching great performances. And suddenly there was a brown man conducting an orchestra. And the brown man, of course, you know as Zubin Mehta, and it was New York Philharmonic. And so a couple of things happened with this one great performance. I mean, it wasn't the only one, obviously, I watched, but this was a pivotal one. I remember it to this day. There's an Indian man, there's someone who looks like me conducting an orchestra, the New York Philharmonic, you know, to know later. That had never happened. Representing sort of something that was similar to me in this kind of mainstream classical music world, that had never happened, right? So that was a big deal. I thought, wow, well, if he can do it, I can do it, right? I mean, suddenly he became this mentor, one among many, you know, in my life at that time. Number 2, they were doing this piece, and it started, and there was this amazing sound, and I thought, what is that? What is that instrument? I don't know. So it turns out it was a rite of spring, and the instrument was a bassoon. So I went to my 6th grade band director, who laughs about this to this day, and said, I want to play the bassoon. Of course, at the time, every kid wanted to play the flute or the trumpet or the saxophone, right? And the bassoon, right? It's like, in my career, I have never had someone come ask to play the bassoon. But again, the public schools had, the public school music in Norman, Oklahoma was fantastic. They had bassoons. All you needed to do was buy a reed. And for us, that was what was affordable. So he was happy to have me play bassoon. He did have me try other instruments just in case. And I played bassoon in the band and the orchestra for a number of years. And then what happened as I got into high school is that I started discovering jazz. And the music of Miles Davis was an important voice for me. I mean, I started listening to a lot of jazz. My best friend at the time was a trumpet player, and we'd get old records from estate sales and play them, and you know, the things that you did, you get on your bike and then go find old records for a dime or a quarter at these old estate sales and stuff. And it was amazing. That it was transformative. I mean, hear Miles Davis, it really motivated me to say, well, I want to play jazz, but you know, short of Gil Evans, there wasn't too much jazz bassoon. So to play in the jazz band, I had to figure out one of those instruments. And as I said, best friend played the trumpet. He had his beginner cornet. So I was like, hey, can I try that? And I started picking it up. And I remember he's like, jerk, you can already play that. What are you doing? So anyway, so I started practicing, and I played trumpet in the jazz band, and I played bassoon in the orchestra in the band. And I did that all the way through high school. And something happened my senior year in high school, and it was an important moment, a pivotal moment, I would say. So we have Miles Davis, we have Clifford Brown, we have Dizzy Gillespie, we have all these like jazz trumpet players who were influencing me at the time in terms of hearing their sound and figuring out, you know, what they're expressing. There was a exhibition of Romar Bearden's work at the University Art Museum, Fred Jones Museum of Art there at the University of Oklahoma, that I went and saw. And it was the first time that I had been struck, you know, in a visual art exhibition, the thread from what I could hear in the voice of Miles Davis and what I could see then with Romar Bearden struck me. At the same time, we were reading The Invisible Man in school by Ralph Ellison. these three things lined up super interestingly for me, in that the Harlem Renaissance and the Black experience in the United States really really opened my eyes to the importance of expression, personal expression, and the importance role expression plays in society. It dawned on me at that time. I wanted to be a doctor, right? My sister's a doctor, and I loved kids, so I wanted to be a pediatrician. But to encapsulate it quickly, I thought in that moment, well, doctors help people live, but artists give people reason to live. And that's that purpose, that drive was super important to me. And so that it was a switch. And so suddenly I was like, well, I have to study music. I have to do this. I have to pursue the personal expression. In retrospect, my father did come to this country, and personal expression was part of the reason I think that he came and brought the family over. India, of course, in retrospect, was a booming place. And of course, all of my relatives who lived there have done very well and grown into it. But Dad did believe in that place of human expression and human ingenuity, and felt that the United States was it was part of the value set. So, in the end, all of those things sort of come out, right? So that's how I stumbled into music. And again, I really credit the access given to me through systems available broadly to the public. Without those, there's no way I find my path to be the president of CalArts.
When did you decide, hey, I think I want to go into arts education and not just perform?
So you remember I said I liked kids and I love kids. And so when I decided to study music, I actually decided to study music education from the get-go. Part of that was I'd already applied to schools, and University of Michigan was one of them, fantastic music school. I think they gave me $500 scholarship, and out-of-state tuition there was already exorbitant. So I stayed in state at the University of Oklahoma. It was quite a good music school compared to all the other. I had been thinking about medicine, right? So those are the schools that I had applied to. And in fact, my sister was at the time in residency at the University of North Carolina. So UNC was one of the schools that I also applied to. I would have met probably Lucy, my wife, as an undergraduate had I have gone there at that point. But that wasn't to be. We were to meet later, right? So, but it was interesting. I always liked teaching. I was a aide to a teacher in middle school, and the teacher was for the computer class, again, the computer programming thing, right? And it was one of the best experiences I had teaching my peers at that point, right? Because you're the same age as the kids in the class, how to use computers, how to engage, do different things. And so I had always enjoyed teaching from that point. So for me, it wasn't a switch, actually. I always thought I loved performing. I loved expression. I liked writing and composing and arranging things, but I also liked teaching. So all of that was part of the get-go. And in fact, I ended up going to SUNY Purchase because I was doing a lot of stuff professionally. I missed working with young people.
Speaking of SUNY Purchase, I just wanted to, if we go back just for a second to that master's degree program that you implemented there. What exactly is a Master of Entrepreneurship in the Arts?
So it's an interesting thing. So as I described, SUNY Purchase has all the art forms that are there. And what I was seeing in the moment is the need in the creative industries to understand how to create new structures to sustain ourselves. So for the most part, in the creative industries, you have the nonprofit and the for-profit, and never the twain shall meet, right? And so they're very kind of distinct from each other. You have very large for-profit institutions like big orchestras, et cetera, big museums, things like that. You have for-profit, which we know as the industries, right? Be that art galleries, be that, the film studios, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part in the industries, they're not necessarily led by artists. And for the most part in the nonprofit space, they're not necessarily led by artists. So in terms of that kind of binary, what other options are there that artists themselves could lead and devise to essentially engage the world with their work, right? How do we put power back into the hands of the artists, the authors, right? The people who are generating the work to get out and engage the world. And so that was the intent there. And so it was the first program in the United States focused on entity creation. So now people use the term entrepreneurship a lot. It's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, right? So it's been hijacked by I think the world. But when we created the program, we really meant it to be entity creation, right? And the way that sort of in business that they use the term entrepreneurship, right? Creating a new venture, figuring out its business plan, putting it out into the world, and being able to create those avenues in the creative industries, and having artists be able to do that themselves. So as a public institution, this was available as sort of an add-on to an undergraduate degree. It could be a standalone. It had a lot of classes at night, so professionals in New York could actually get it. You know, young professors would come out and were you know, engaged in making art in New York, could come in the evenings and get that to happen. So that was the thrust of it. It's been a couple of years since I've been there, but we've really felt it filled a need, a very practical need, to provide, understanding and community to artists engaged in creating entities, and basically to seed that moving forward. Still a need that we see right now. We really see this binary between, for-profit and nonprofit, right? Basically defining the space. But we do see technology allowing for more direct authorship to happen. And so I really do suspect moving forward that artists are going to engage that space more and more aggressively.
Now you're at Cal Arts, and 2020, not just at Cal Arts, but Cal Arts in 2020, one of the weirdest years, in memory. With a pandemic going on, are you having online classes? What are the challenges that, the hurdles that you're having to leap over to continue arts education for people during this time?
Yeah, it's a tough moment. And so it came upon us with no limited warning. And you can imagine the cycles in education, and particularly in college, are that the admissions usually open towards the end of the calendar year, right? They tend to close in the area around March, and then decisions are mailed, and students generally inform their schools by May 1. And so we, at the very beginning of March, we had our March board meeting, which usually happens. We had that quarters board meeting. And quite literally during the board meeting, all of this stuff was happening. If you remember, it was really the end of February when this stuff started to really, we had Seattle and all of those things that were happening. So there was a node of this activity in the Bay Area, if you remember correctly. And so there was deep concern. And it became very clear that the name of the game here was to be able to find people who might have the virus and say, hey, you're 6, stay home, right? That tracing was so cumbersome. Just in that day or two, we realized this is not gonna happen. So easily. So we went to all remote classes. Actually, we suspended classes towards the end of that week to take the weekend, and started on Monday. Actually, we suspended for a week to allow the faculty to tilt, and then started the following a week later on all remote classes, and then they've never gone back because of everything. Right? You can imagine in art making, and of course everybody who's an artist who's likely engaged in this realizes how disruptive that is. As much as we romanticize the artist as a solitary worker in the attic by themselves, like eventually ripping their ear off, right? That's not really how artists work, right? It's not a solitary exercise. It's definitely, particularly in the performing arts, but also in the visual arts, it's community is deeply important for it. And working with others is deeply important. So to say that that's kind of upended in this moment is an understatement, right? So since we're only a College of the Arts, that it's super difficult right now. The students, Southern California happen to be timed slightly differently than other places. So we aren't even, the County of Los Angeles is not even allowing artists back onto campus, students back onto campuses, right? Even for access to art making facilities. So we have a number of drive-by things where students can drive by and pick up equipment and be able to do the art making wherever they are, if they happen to be in this area. They didn't have to come. Many of our international students did get stuck because of the strange regulations the Trump administration decided to hoist on international students, it just wasn't a lot of flexibility that they said, well, even if you're starting remote, maybe you can find a way to come to the United States and get settled, because when we were allowed to interact, which we will, you'll be prepared to do that. So, you know, it's been a tough moment, but the faculty here have been remarkably resilient and coming up with amazing new ways to engage this. So knowing that we were going to be basically with remote instruction in the fall, they devised wonderful things. In fact, we were just reviewing some different projects that happened. In our music technology program, one thing that happened was that we took all the students who were enrolled and we surveyed them and said, hey, what technology do you have? Do you have the mic? Do you have this cable? Do you have this interface? And it turned out there was a decent proportion of students in that program that didn't have those things. So we quickly purchased those things, created these kits, and mailed them to the students wherever they were, so that they can create their home studios to be able to engage and do this. And then so one of the classes that's then been devised to do this is an interesting one. So it's about generating work, but generating work in that space, right? But the advantage you've got now is not only are the students wherever they are all over the world, so could be the artists that come into the class. So one of the things that CalArts does very aggressively is bring artists into the community and have them engage with the younger students. So the visiting artist notion, we do that quite a bit. And so this class now is engaging artists all over the world. So there's musicians in Ghana, musicians in Indonesia, musicians in Berlin, musicians in London, musicians in New York, musicians in Florida, musicians in Texas, musicians here in California, that are all engaged with the students in making work. And so the students get to collaborate with these artists from all over the world in doing this, right? And it's kind of an amazing thing. And of course, they're learning as they go along. Synchronous, doing that at the same time is really hard. But they're finding ways to, exploit the asynchronous things where they send files and do all of that stuff in great ways. Not unlike what we're doing now, I suppose. So it's great. It's amazing to see all of that stuff. In some ways, you would have wanted to do some things like that anyway. And so we're discovering, I think, new things that the constraints of this moment are allowing us to explore, or forcing us to explore, one could say. I suspect on the other side of this, many of these things are going to stay, right? We're going to enjoy a lot of these things that we discover, and we'll probably choose to do them, right? Even though we're forced to do them now. But without question, a lot of the stuff that we miss will come back, and probably come back with force.
In addition to a pandemic, one of the other things that we're sort of grappling with in this moment is sort of a renewed sensitivity, I think, to issues involving immigrants and people of color. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on this from the standpoint of the arts. Given your personal history, I think you're uniquely positioned to talk about the importance of this, of the arts for people of color, for immigrants. And for an immigrant who grew up in Oklahoma, what is this moment? What are the opportunities of the challenges and the opportunities of this moment for us?
Absolutely. I'm not sure the challenges are any different than they were in this particular lens. I'm not sure the challenges are any different than they were 6 months ago. Yes, I mean, I think the pandemic brings to the fore a lot of differential in opportunity that was already there, right? And so you see it manifested in other ways. Access to technology, access to internet, these kind of things are really brought to the fore, I think. So the economic disparities that have only grown in the United States have really brought to the fore. And but specifically, you're saying in terms of this notion of identity, race, and those things that have been brought to the fore in this moment. Those things are longstanding, right? I mean, while maybe the public's consciousness, let's hope, shifted a little bit in this moment. And so it's maybe slightly more okay to talk about these things. People like me have been dealing with these issues since we were little kids, right? So it's nothing new. And in our lifetimes, it feels like maybe it's gotten better and maybe it's gotten worse. It depends on where you live. It depends on a whole host of other things. But the simple fact of the matter is, human beings are biased, right? Implicit bias is just something that is part of our brains, right? And so it isn't oh, you have implicit bias and you don't. We all do. This is how human psychology works, right? So my mom used to always say something to me. I think it's probably like a Tamil saying or something. But in short, it was, God gives you a brain so that you don't have to act like an animal. We are called to use our faculties, our ability to kind of reason and pull that forward to the betterment of all, right? We're supposed to do that. We're not supposed to cater to our baser instincts, right? And that's kind of the lesson she was trying to tell me in that moment, right? And I don't remember what triggered the conversation. We were having a philosophical after dinner conversation, I guess. But suffice it to say, that bias is on display. Simply put, the mask I have to wear in society is the mask the society gives me to wear, I should say, right? Is that. And there's often prejudgments that are made just because of who I am, the way I look, how all of those things happen. It's there. The weight of that, the mask that society gives a Black man is something to be understood better in this moment, right? The weight that society gives to a Black woman is something that's better to be understood in this moment. We have just, as a society, probably not made as much progress there as we should have. And again, the consciousness may have shifted right now. So what does this mean for artists? Well, listen, artists, I always say artists create models of how the world could be, right? So I firmly believe that if there was not representation of a Black man as the president of the United States on television, in movies, in novels, that those were all pre-existing conditions, so to speak, for Barack Obama to become president of the United States, right? This imagination and allowing people to see the world differently is something that artists do best. So in this moment, as there is this kind of renewed focus on it, I think artists will help us see the way that society could be. And I think that that's really, really important on how we can proceed and move forward on this. So it's an interesting question. Again, from my perspective, I'm not sure, like, all of a sudden stuff changed, other than maybe, again, we have a little bit more permission to be a little bit more open to talk about this with each other. And I think that that's a great thing. That's super important, And if that leads to more, more understanding and more progress towards us recognizing our own biases as a society, that will be great.
Being there in California at Cal Arts, you're in the heart of of media, of different art forms. So, for example, technology is always changing. We've moved from film to video, high definition video, even major motion pictures. Is there anything on the horizon that you see coming that maybe the rest of us don't, because we're not in that we're not in that arena?
Well, it's related to the question you talked about with entrepreneurship, as it were. I do see the need has always been there in terms of, shall we say, artists' management of their own creations, right? So if we think about in any of the spaces, if you're a writer, you need a publisher, right? But the publishing industry got upended with technology. If you're a musician, you need a record label, or you need an orchestra. You need all of these things, right? And so these are the apparatuses I'm talking about. What I think is that artists moving forward, combined with technology, artists are going to be empowered to essentially create those vehicles themselves. And it will be important for artists to do that. So I see that really shifting, like the purpose. We see it, think about let's just take moving image for a second, films, and as short format, long format. So what we used to call TV and what we used to call movies and movie theaters, right? The need for that kind of narrative storytelling, the need that kind of, non-narrative documentary, any of that to put out there. The desire for authors to have more and more authors has really risen. And part of that is because the delivery of that has changed, right? Before we had 4 stations, if you included PBS, right? You had the UHF stations, but you had these couple of VHF stations. You had to go right to the exact time, and you had to sit there and watch television, right? It's very different. On demand changed all of that. these mechanisms change all that. So now studios basically have their own apps, so you're getting them straight from Netflix and Disney and et cetera, right? So there's something cut out. Now the broadcast stations are not there anymore. They're not part of that chain of things, right? So as those things move and change, artists have the opportunity with technology to bring their work directly to people who would receive it, in the way that, if you made your own work and you displayed it, if you found a way to get people to see it, that's all it takes, right? That's what a gallery does, what a museum does, et cetera, et cetera. This is what a club does when you're a jazz player. So I think that that's what we have to see on the horizon, is that artists are going to probably engage one another and the world in different ways in thinking about engaging their work. And I think that those mechanisms, I look forward to seeing that, because that's, one hopes that if we do this correctly, that will empower artists more than they have been before, rather than often more money and more notoriety goes to all the things in between the artist and the recipient, right? The artist and the person the artist is engaging. That in between is usually where a lot of stuff goes. If that gets smaller, then it's to the benefit of the artist and probably to all of us who enjoy the art.
Before we go, I have to bring up one thing. I noticed on the CalArts website, they have a page, fun facts about Ravi Rajan. So I noticed it listed your 3 favorite films. Citizen Kane, or 3 of your favorite films. Citizen Kane, 2001, A Space Odyssey, and La Dolce Vita. 3 great films. I want to hone in on 2001. What was that whole monolith thing about? What was that? What do you think that monolith, everyone has a different opinion. What do you think that monolith represented?
So I read that book when I was little, and I watched that movie, and I'm sure I didn't understand a thing of it when I watched it, but I was fascinated. So at first I was fascinated by this movie, by the moviness, right? By the speed in which those scenes, those tableaux would move. I mean, I was mesmerized, right? I was just like staring at this, right? And then comes the question that you're talking about: what is this monolith, et cetera, et cetera. I think that, and I enjoy science fiction, right? I enjoy Star Trek. I enjoy these kind of things, and I have since I was a little kid. I do think it was a piece of intelligent life and communication. So this notion that the universe is much, we don't know as much as we think. And so that, in that scene where the evolution of man is at that early stage, and yet there was something much more involved, so evolved that it could send a communication, or send something that could collect information down to the earth and engage with it. Yeah. And the interesting thing there is the implication, right, in that scene, that basically the invention of tools was something that this another intelligent life form was like, maybe if you use this slightly differently, it would be different. And that was something that came into being in that moment, right? And the beautiful thing about that scene, right, there's no verbal dialogue in that first scene when you first see the monolith, right? Just striking. Again, I just am mesmerized by that as a kid, right? And so that's just one among many. We're just talking about the monolith, which of course reappears towards the end of the novel. I think it's just fun. Thank you for that memory. I haven't thought about the movie in a while. They were showing 70mm prints of it here in Los Angeles, right? And it was something that I wanted. Yeah, it's great. I mean, they do that sort of thing here in LA. And I just couldn't get the schedule to work, which is unfortunate. I hope when at some point they start doing it again, because I'd love to see that one in 70mm.
Ravi Rajan, thank you so much for helping us talk about our theme of the festival this year, You Will Be Found, and helping us sort of look at it from the standpoint of the arts.
Thank you, Joshua. Thanks, everyone.